Welcome back to the Business of Biotech. I'm Ben Comer, Chief Editor at Life Science Leader, and today I'm speaking with Bernard Ravina, MD, CEO at Vima Therapeutics, a company that launched from stealth with a $60 million Series A this past May. Vima is focused on neurological diseases, and the company's first program is an oral treatment in phase 1 for dystonia, a movement disorder. Bernard is a Johns Hopkins trained neurologist who also holds a master's degree in biostatistics and epidemiology from the University of Pennsylvania. After a decade in government and academia at the NIH and then at the University of Rochester, he crossed over into the biopharmaceutical industry and has worked at Biogen, Voyager Therapeutics, Praxis Precision Medicine, and as an entrepreneur in residence at Atlas Venture, which led to Vima's Series A raise. Bernard is a first-time CEO at Vima, and I'm excited to speak with him about the formation of the company and working in stealth mode, how Vima chose an initial product candidate, how dystonia relates to other neurological disorders, and his plans for the company's future. Thanks so much for being here, Bernard.
Thanks, Ben. It's great to talk with you. Thanks for the nice intro. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. I mentioned your background work at the NIH. Would you mind talking a little bit about what you did there?
Yeah, happy to. So I was fortunate, as you mentioned in your intro, I finished training. I specialized neurology, movement disorder, in epidemiology and biostatistics. Then I had this opportunity to go to NIH. And as you may be familiar, NIH has two parts. Got the intramural where you kind of conduct your own research, then the extramural, which actually does the outside funding of universities and helps set research priorities. So I had colleagues who had moved there from University of Pennsylvania, senior colleagues. I was a junior guy at the time, but I had the chance to work in both those parts of NIH. And worked in the intramural side in a neurogenetics lab with a great mentor named Kurt Fishbeck. And on the kind of external facing extramural side, I helped set up research and centers and clinical trials in Parkinson's disease. It was a wonderful experience. I was there for about 5 years. And I think kind of one of the key perspectives you get being at NIH is kind of understanding like what are the gaps in research, what are the scientific gaps, or the gaps in infrastructure, and what does the government need to do? How can NIH help facilitate progress in those areas?
Yeah, I'm curious if that, experience in public health is something that, if there are lessons that have kind of carried through your career since then, or do you feel like it's more of, we'll talk a little bit about, your work at the University of Rochester, but I guess I'm thinking about moving into the industry. I mean, is it something that, are there things you learned at the NIH that have stayed with you?
Yeah, very much so. Because and I think the key thing that's kind of stayed with me is that perspective on like where are the gaps, what's needed, scientifically, clinically. That I think that's a key perspective coming in the industry. Understand what's going on in the landscape and how you can help or build a new organization or company that can help close those gaps and develop new treatments. I like that. Absolutely.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. After you left the NIH, you ran a part of the academic medical center at the University of Rochester. Was that similar to the work that you did at NIH, or was that something, totally new and different?
So thematically, it was the same. So I've been, interested in movement disorders and therapeutics, in neurology kind of broadly. That's kind of the theme that goes through my career, whether it's government, academic, or industry. But going to the University of Rochester, again, I was very fortunate, wonderful colleagues, great medical center. And we had a great setup there where our department was very focused on clinical research. So we did our own hands-on clinical research with our own studies, patients who were participating from the community. But we also had what I kind of call it academic CRO. So we help run studies, for companies. We had multiple study groups that specialize in different disease areas: Parkinson's, Huntington's, epilepsy. And so we would coordinate and organize and run those studies, whether it was industry funded or NIH funded or foundation like the Michael J. Fox Foundation. So we had about 75 or 80 people involved there. So that was a great experience that kind of bridged that whole world of academic, industry, and some government funding collaborating to develop new therapeutics and run high quality trials.
Yeah, and also I'm sure created a kind of platform or at least built the fundamentals that you would need to move into industry, which I wanted to ask you about. What kind of triggered that decision? What made you decide that, it was time to leave the University of Rochester and head over to Biogen, I think in 2010.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, like that was a great setting. I got a lot of exposure to industry. My interest, as I mentioned, kind of, carried through neuroscience, specifically movement disorders, and developing new therapies. And so it was almost a natural move because it really is like the three-legged stool of scientific breakthroughs in healthcare is government, academia, and industry. And I kind of knew that if I really wanted to focus on therapeutics development, that I'd move to industry at some point. Biogen was really at the forefront in neuroscience. When I was a medical student, there were really very few drugs for neurologic diseases. And I remember when the first interferons came out for the treatment of relapsing remitting MS, it's like, this is it. This is the leading edge. We're going to have a lot more. And so, yeah, that was a great place to go for a first industry job. Wonderful colleagues who really knew neuroscience drug development. So, yeah, it was a great initial step and one that I felt very comfortable with knowing some of those people.
Was there an appeal to actually see a product go from the early stages of clinical research, all the way into patients? I mean, you could have continued doing clinic, you talked about having to work with, getting to work with private industry, with government, with foundations conducting clinical research. But it strikes me as, the real difference being if you're at a company, you're there all the way through, approval, hopefully approval and commercialization.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Ben. So when you're doing it in an academic setting, you're collaborating, but you get pieces of it, right? Right. So, the company's doing some things, they're collaborating with you on some things. And exactly to your point, it's want to do it right from scratch, see all of it and see it through longitudinally. I don't think I appreciated coming from academics, how long that takes, how hard that really is, and what it looks like, from inside a company, from inside a sponsor that's really driving that. But that's exactly the experience I wanted to get.
Yeah, and then you found that out firsthand. You worked as a chief medical officer. You worked in clinical development, but you worked as a chief medical officer at both Voyager and Praxis Precision Medicines before taking the CEO role at Vima. What about that transition? What made you want to go from, a CMO role to, a CEO role or a role that's, responsible for company formation and leadership?
Yeah. So, both those moves going from Biogen and clinical development to CMO, and then CMO to CEO, you learn a lot along the way, right? And so going from Biogen to CMO roles, going from a kind of mid-sized company with a lot of support to companies that were really, really interesting, that had programs that I really wanted to work on, but you help build the infrastructure. So you go from a supported environment to one in which you're going to build it, choose the people, get all the policies, procedures, and practices in place. Like, it's just kind of appealing if you like building things. So I spent about 10 years in that CMO role, which I think is one of the best roles in biotech. Like, being a CMO, running the clinical studies, reviewing the data, that's where the rubber meets the road. But kind of in that capacity, I had the good fortune to work with, I think it was 4 different CEOs and do 2 IPOs. And you get to see like, well, the science of the clinical data are super important. You can't be better than that, but you need everything to come together. You need to understand the market. You need to build and support the company. You need to fund it. And so I think the thing for me that was motivating was just really, I don't know if enjoying is the right word, but really like, liking and being intensely interested in how all that comes together. And like, you synthesize it and you synchronize your science and your fundraising and try and keep those in pace. So it was that kind of big picture. And I think if you like the big picture, the CEO role is really appealing in that way.
Did you know that about yourself, like as far back as Biogen or maybe at Voyager? I mean, at that point, were you looking at those CEOs that you worked with and starting to kind of take notes about things that, that worked or didn't work with the, kind of secret knowledge, that you may want to do it yourself one day, or did that come more recently?
So see if you believe my answer, because I do think there are a lot of people who like who did like they grow up knowing that they want to be a CEO of something. For me, not at all the case. I really like the clinical side of things, and it was just kind of growing into it, seeing it, and the realization that like, if you want to own one piece of it, like, and be able to really control the direction of that, you kind of need all of it to come together. So it was a much more recent thing over the last few years. And some of the advice I got from, really smart, experienced people was beware, careful what you wish for. Like, especially nowadays. It's like, now I look back and I think like, well, I
I
guess
had it pretty good, right?
yeah, exactly. I was like, yeah, I didn't really need to lose more sleep. So, yeah.
Well, you're a first-time CEO now. What has that experience been like so far? Is there, well, I guess what part of the job has surprised you the most about, being in charge of the whole operation?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I've been fortunate because started this company, incubated it with Atlas, and they have a really well developed kind of ecosystem and support network, and so they're really helpful getting a company off the ground, and they're obviously very experienced. I think the thing that was probably predictable but maybe surprising for me is just how much you learn in the course of doing this. And also just the point about the people part of it. It's the clarity, and you have this, as the CMO, your team is kind of your team, right? They're clinically oriented. They know what you're doing. As the CEO, you have a much more diverse team, and your team is internal and external in terms of your communication. And so it's kind of the clarity of the vision, clarity around what you're trying to do when you execute, and making sure that different audiences kind of all hear the same thing, and that you set the right expectations. So just, it's a lot more work than I expected.
Yeah, incubated in Atlas Venture. I was curious how you kind of first got connected with Atlas Venture, and what more could you say about how Vima, came about? What was the catalyst that kind of triggered it and made you know, like, this is it, this is the company that, I want to start up?
Yeah, yeah. So it came together really nicely. I had colleagues here at Atlas, uh, Dave Grazel, one of the partners, somebody I know for a long time, and we all kind of know each other through the ecosystem. And then just meeting the rest of the partnership, it was clear was a fit, a very straightforward group. And then I joined in late 22, It was fall of 22. And I asked myself two key questions, which is, where's their white space? Where haven't there been new therapeutics developed in a while? And of course,
In neurology specifically, sorry to interrupt you.
no,
Yeah.
no, not at all. Yeah. In neuro specifically, and by heart pain and movement disorders, I focus on dystonia. And I know those patients. I treated them, and I knew there wasn't anything new there for decades. And so the second question I asked is, well, where are there good genetics that can clearly help me get confidence that we have the right biological target? And so started diving into dystonia genetics, and we arrived at some mechanisms that I'm sure we'll talk about. But it was that clarity that clinical need got validated mechanism that really resonated with the Atlas team and later on other investors. And then, of course, ability to fill the space there in terms of clinical development so that we can, fulfill that unmet clinical need.
I definitely want to get into Vima's lead clinical program, and product candidate that you're developing. I just want to ask, one more question just about the startup, which is kind of the elements of securing that $60 million Series A. The listeners of Business of Biotech, a lot of them are ambitious, folks that want to lead companies or want to grow their business. Funding, it's no secret, it is tough to find for early stage companies at the moment. What else could you say just about, you kind of decided, it sounds like you decided on a mechanism, you decided on a general therapeutic area. How did you make that, how did that funding come in to actually get things moving?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the great things about working with an experienced venture group like Atlas. They, once we had the concept that we were talking about, targeting muscarinic cholinergic receptors, and convinced that was a solid mechanism, we were able to get seed funding from Atlas, which was just a few $1 million initially, and do some key experiments that convinced us that this was a tractable approach that we were taking. And then based on those data, in usual materials you put together, your high-level development plan, your overall strategy, we went out and talked with other investors, very fortunate, and every company is different in that way, but the story really resonated with Access Industries and Canaan, and so they joined Atlas in the $60 million Series A. And all three are very sophisticated biotech investors who have been real partners that also really understand clinical development. And I think given that our program and approach was moving along very quickly towards clinic where we are now, that was really a great fit for all of us.
Do you think it was beneficial for you, in that phase of attracting capital, starting the company, to know those patients, those dystonia patients, and be able to kind of talk very specifically about unmet need? I mean, was that, and I'm just thinking about other leaders, and you're coming from an academic and government public health as well as a CMO role. How helpful, I guess, was that in making the case, for fundraising, around this particular target?
Yeah, it's a great question, Ben. I think the answer is it was very helpful. I think, there hasn't been, the reason there's unmet need is because nobody's developed therapeutics for dystonia. And since nobody's developed therapeutics, there's some unknowns. And so being able to speak about those patients with real, firsthand understanding, I think goes a long way. And being able to kind of envision and articulate, this is what we would do, this is what success looks like. That really resonated, and that I think some of those investors who I mentioned, they've they really talked about that. It's the vision and the background and the ability to execute.
I want to ask you about your stealth period. Vima, I mentioned in the intro, emerged from stealth in May. You were doing work before that, I think going back to 2023 is what you said. We hear companies, we hear about companies emerging from stealth somewhat regularly. It's not always clear to me, at least, what the specific reasons for being in stealth mode are, or for when you emerge
Yeah.
or don't emerge. Can you talk about Vima's stealth period a little bit and just kind of the decision making process for when and why to launch publicly?
Yeah, it's such a good question. It's like one of those things that I've learned as and I never really critically thought about that topic. So that kind of came with the work and assumption. And it's like you put the company together and then you go out and tell everybody about it because you want it to know. But you flip that and it's like, well, why? What do you need? The broader public and biotech ecosystem to know and when? And so once I started thinking about that, it's like we had, we're hiring a great team, largely kind of from within our venture network and our own network. So as people are known to us, so we didn't need to attract talent. We were well funded, so we weren't looking for new funding or partnerships. So question really, once I thought about it for a while, it's like, well, we need the community to engage as we get closer to phase 2, and we're going to be looking to partner with the patient community and ask people to enroll in our studies. So that was really kind of the thinking behind it, and so that's why we came out of stealth just a few months ago.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and I've thought about it in the past. And granted, I'm not totally clear on why some companies come out when they do, or don't come out when they do. But it seems, at least it seemed to me in the past, likely that there was a kind of fundraising strategy involved with it. So maybe if you need, money to make those initial hires or do those initial experiences, then you can't be stealth if you want to bring investors on board. So that's I think a part of it, or a big part of it, I would assume.
Absolutely. That's a big part of it. It's, attracting talent, attracting capital, potential partners. But, another reason to kind of wait on that is the more you know of your story, when you're telling it, the better you can tell that. It gets back to that, like, big part of being a CEO is communicating clearly. And it's like, let me tell you the story when we're a little further along, we know a little bit more about it. But yeah, I think those are really the reasons.
Yeah, wait till you have a good story to tell, right?
What?
Let's talk a little bit about VIM 0423. This is your first and lead candidate development program. How did you choose that candidate for your first development program, Bernard, and where did it come from?
Yeah, so it's a homegrown program, and I'll take a quick step back. And so we got convinced of this mechanism that muscarinic cholinergic receptors were really a key target in dystonia, that these patients have never seen an oral therapeutic. They can only have brain surgery or injections of toxin to weaken muscle. So we got convinced of the mechanism that it's a homegrown program. It's a small molecule approach. It's actually a combination. The overall goal of the program is that we know that muscarinic cholinergic receptors, antagonizing them in the brain, can work really well. And historically, there are drugs for Parkinson's that target that mechanism, but they've been very poorly tolerated, so they get very little clinical use. So the real kind of next question was, how do we make that better? How do we make it more tolerable, wider therapeutic window, be able to drive the pharmacology in the brain to safely get efficacy? And so we arrived at this combination small molecule approach to do that. We're going to talk, in the spirit of like telling the story when you know more. We're wrapping up our phase one. And so we'll be talking a lot more about specifics around the mechanism just probably later this year, early next year, but homegrown program that really solves that very clear clinical problem.
Got it. So the VIM 0423, it targets muscarinic cholinergic receptors in the brain. I know there are people that are listening that are going to hear muscarinic and think of Karuna Therapeutics, acquired by Bristol Myers Squibb, for around $13 billion 2 years ago. Karuna developed a drug that targets muscarinic receptors, but as a treatment for schizophrenia. That drug's now approved and commercialized as Cobenfy by BMS. Is the VIM 0423 mechanism similar to Cobenfy or different? And maybe you can say a little bit more just about muscarinic receptors as a drug target.
Yeah. It's a great topic. So we've known about muscarinic receptors for a very long time, and but there's
100 years, right? They were identified 100 years ago.
I think that's right. But like a lot of other targets, like these things come and go, even modalities come and go, and there's been this incredible renaissance, led in by these developments in schizophrenia, and so. Our approach is related, except it's kind of the inverse. So Cobenfy and other drugs being developed for schizophrenia, they agonize or enhance activity at muscarinic receptors. In movement disorders, it's the flip side, whether it's dystonia or Parkinson's, you antagonize. So we're looking for central antagonism in the periphery to balance that out, to offset symptoms, to adverse effects that are known to be caused by agonism in the periphery. So, these are kind of mirror images of each other, and you see that with other neurotransmitters like dopamine, block dopamine, as known antipsychotics. Enhancing dopamine improves movement and Parkinson's and other conditions.
I see. And you're right. There does seem to be kind of different mechanisms, different targets that move in and out of vogue with the muscarinic receptors. I'm just curious if there's if there's like a new technology or some new way to target these receptors that have helped enable this, renaissance that you mentioned, or not.
Yeah, I think it's a couple of things. I think one has been just seeing clinical developments here, and knowing that these drugs can work, they target those receptors safely. So that's been one. That's been years in the making. But I think the other is the ability to be a little bit more selective in which receptors and where. So I think that's what's really driving the enhanced safety, and that's a key component of our thinking and approach.
Got it. Okay, I want to just dig in a little bit on dystonia. I'll have you describe the unmet need, but I'm not sure if there are subtypes of dystonia, or if I think there are obviously more severe cases and less severe cases, but what would you say about the unmet need and I guess the dystonia patient population broadly?
Yeah, so dystonia is an involuntary movement disorder. It's driven by abnormal signals in the brain, which is why we're targeting those receptors in the brain, but it shows up as involuntary muscle contractions. And those contractions can and do occur in pretty much every part of the body. So people can have dystonia in virtually any part of the body. Tends to happen in kids and kind of young, really young to adults to midlife is the peak. And it's very disabling because these movements are painful, and they often worsen as people try and kind of do voluntary movements. So interfere with their regular function. So the need there is very clear. There are a couple of approaches to treating it, no orals, as we mentioned. People can have deep brain surgery, which is a kind of brain surgery with indwelling hardware and stimulators and stuff. But
That
for
would be for the most severe
the
cases?
most severe, yeah. And of course, most people don't want to have that.
Sure.
It's less than about 3% of people have it. And then the other approach to treating it is repeated injections of botulinum toxin. And so that's the same like kind of Botox that people use for cosmetic purposes.
And
But we
headaches now too, right?
and headaches. That's right. It can work well, but here you're injecting it into muscles to weaken them versus treating the underlying cause. And it can work well in some people, but for a lot of people, it's not enough. We can't do widespread injections across multiple areas of the body. So, our belief in patient community and clinical community clearly support this is that for the about 160,000 people who have dystonia and no other neurologic conditions, they would choose an oral therapeutic before surgery or repeated injections.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm also curious if, in thinking through the launch of this company, getting started, conducting initial experiments, did you find, this VIM 0423 candidate and then do some work and figure out kind of like what indication it might work best in? Or did you land on dystonia and then go out and find or produce or invent,
Yeah.
a drug that could treat that? How did that work?
Yeah. We went backwards from, I don't know which way is forward, which way is backwards. So we went from, clinical and biological understanding to go find candidates and develop a drug that would work for that. So we understood the biology and then, are developing Vima 423 to address that versus drug. Where does this fit? And one of the really important things we kind of figured out along the way is you asked, are all these dystonias one thing or are they different? We realized there are genetic dystonias, there are sporadic, no known cause, and then there are dystonias that occur in the setting of other neurologic disorders like Parkinson's or children with cerebral palsy. What we realized is the biology and the role of muscarinic cholinergic receptors very similar across those. So the implication is, understanding that biology, one approach that's well tolerated, where you can really drive the doses, could treat all of those. So we start with the 160,000 people who have isolated dystonia, but we hope to branch out to dystonia in Parkinson's, cerebral palsy, and other areas.
Do you think the muscarinic receptors are, a good potential for, other neurological conditions as well, beyond dystonia? Do you have, plans to kind of expand out in the category with a similar target or no?
Yeah, well, there's definitely a role in other clinical areas like tremor in the setting of Parkinson's. And so I think as we're seeing in psychiatry, like started schizophrenia, moving to Alzheimer's and other areas, we'll see this grow as we get more, clinical validation and further in development.
Yeah, I also wanted to ask just kind of about your clinical strategy. Well, first, when do you anticipate going into your first human clinical trials?
Right around the end of the year, we're completing phase 1 now, so we should have that done by the end of the year, and then we'll go into phase 2 in isolated dystonia by around the end of the year, early next year.
Okay, and then what do you anticipate your kind of pipeline looking like I mean, what are you going to pursue this candidate kind of up until the late stages of clinical development, focus all your energy on that? Do you anticipate starting up new programs with either other molecules or additional indications? How are you thinking about that at this point?
Yeah, really good question. I think it's something we as a team think about a lot. Like we're very excited about Vima 423 and moving this into phase 2, opportunity to be the first oral. As we understand more about the biology and kind of the clinical relevance that you were getting at here, we'll hopefully unlock more potential programs and applications. But that remains to be seen, and we'll talk about that more in the future.
Right. Okay. Bernard, what are your top priorities for the next, let's say 12 months? Are there, you mentioned getting into the clinic. I assume that's
Yeah.
a key
Yeah, that's hard.
milestone, yeah, that you're
Yeah.
working toward right now. Are there any other, priorities that you would mention, clinically or, in terms of business strategy or fundraising?
Yeah, we're very much focused on clinical execution. So, uh, wrapping up phase 1, moving into phase 2. Really, this is the first oral drug development program in dystonia. And so, everything else has kind of been devices, injectables. So, executing here, partnering with the patient community to really support participation, support understanding of how clinical trials work, and setting expectations there. That's really what we're focused on. We got great investors who are supporting us through phase 2 readout, and and then we'll see what's next after that.
All right, got it. And well, let me ask this, in terms of let's just say a phase 3 trial,
Yeah.
given, what about the dystonia population, like how large do you think, and how long of a trial, but how large of a trial do you think that would need to be in phase 3?
Yeah. So one of the nice things, it's great for drug development about this approach in dystonia is you can see treatment benefit in just a few months. You kind of get a maximal treatment benefit we expect in 3 to 4 months. So the trials aren't very long. So it's recruitment time followed by 4 months on drug. And so sample sizes, we'll be talking more about the phase 2 and future phase 3s, but these aren't huge studies, and even phase 3s have, like with the toxins, have typically been around the 200 patient range. So these are manageable, not too long clinical development studies, unlike disease modification or looking for rate of decline in Alzheimer's disease. Those are challenging, longer studies to conduct.
Yeah, and I realize it's early days in the development of this product, but do you have I assume that it will be administered chronically for patients. Is that right? Do you have a sense of like what the dosing will look like yet?
That's right. Yeah, we expect this to be once a day dosing and chronic, like, because you want to keep the drug on the receptors and keep that treatment effect going.
Got it. Okay. My final question for you, Bernard, is there any advice that you'd like to give to listeners who are perhaps working in academia, but maybe, considering a jump into the life science industry, or maybe, they have a really great invention or something that they're interested in academia that they want to form a company around,
Yeah.
what would you tell them?
Yeah, so it's interesting. A lot of my colleagues from academics are interested in industry, and the thing I tell them, I really like it. There's a learning curve. I think a couple of things is, for kind of younger researchers is like, you know, complete your training, really have like a body of knowledge, kind of skill set that you can help contribute and plug in. And then you'll grow once you get into an industry role, and you can kind of differentiate, learn new things there. But I think it's really important, especially on the clinical research side, to have a strong skill set coming in. And then the other thing that I tell colleagues and people who are interested in moving into industry is culture really matters. If you're working at one big academic medical center, Hopkins and Harvard are probably more similar than different. But, company to company, little startup, mid-sized company, those are very different. So really, really pay attention to culture and colleagues.
Yeah, well, that makes me want to ask an additional last question, if it's okay, which is, you talked about that you like to build things. You're building a brand new company. You've made some of your early hires. What is your approach to finding people that you want to work with, that you want to hire? Obviously, you're looking for really talented people, that can bring, perhaps a skill that isn't in the company yet. But is there anything else you would say? Everybody, wants good people, to work at their company. Is there anything that you would say specifically about kind of what you look for in whether it's, an executive team or just anyone, that you're hiring to come work at Vima?
Yeah, right. Choosing our colleagues is one of the hardest things we do. We're not that good at it, right? Like interview people, predictive value isn't that great. So one of the things we've emphasized, we're small, so it's easier, but is kind of within network, people we know or somebody else a colleague of ours has worked with them and we know their style. And I think that kind of number one thing I want is the focus on the work and the purpose in a low ego kind of environment. It's focus on getting it right, not being right. And so they can get some very high drive people who really want to, it's great. But our team in particular really likes to focus on collaboration, understanding, and getting it right.
Bernard, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. Really appreciate talking with it.
We've been speaking with Bernard Ravina, CEO at Vima Therapeutics. I'm Ben Comer, and you've just listened to the Business of Biotech. Find us and subscribe anywhere you listen to podcasts, and be sure to check out our new weekly videocast of these conversations every Monday under the Business of Biotech tab at lifescienceleader.com. We'll see you next week, and thanks as always for listening.